It was an unexpected and shocking turn of events when a young man who had been pronounced dead by doctors came back to life just as preparations were being made to take his body to the morgue. This was no ordinary case of survival. His story would go on to defy the conventional understanding of life and death. What he experienced during the time he was believed to be dead was beyond anything that science or medicine could explain at the time, and it continues to captivate anyone who hears it. This is a tale that is both profound and unsettling, revealing a glimpse into the unseen world that seems to be more complex than anyone could have imagined. It is a story that challenges what we know about life, death, and everything in between. The story begins with Roberto Carlos, a psychiatrist who became famous for his own remarkable near-death experience. In 1965, he shared an incredible account during a lecture, one that would forever change the way people viewed death and the afterlife. At the time, Richie was deeply involved in psychiatric research and had never considered the possibility of life continuing after death. However, his views were forever altered by what he learned from another doctor, Raymond Moody, who would go on to write the influential book Life After Life. Moody's study, inspired by Richie's experience, explored the phenomenon of near-death experiences, NDEs, and it would go on to document the stories of many others who had similar encounters with the afterlife. The details of these NDEs were often strikingly similar. The sensation of traveling through a dark tunnel at great speed, an overwhelming sense of being separate from one's body, and the shocking realization that the individual was watching their own lifeless body from a distance. As the experience unfolds, they observe the frantic efforts of doctors and nurses trying to revive them, but from a place far removed from the physical world. In some cases, the person encounters deceased loved ones or even spiritual beings who offer comfort and guidance. Some describe an all-encompassing feeling of peace, love, and warmth, an experience so profound that it feels more real than anything they had ever known in their earthly existence. One of the most common elements of these experiences is the panoramic life review. In this moment, individuals see significant moments from their past flash before their eyes. These aren't just memories, but vivid recollections that reveal the true essence of each experience, with a deeper understanding of the choices they made and how they impacted others. But the most striking aspect is the realization that death is not the end, and that there is something more, something beyond the physical world. Despite the beauty and serenity of this experience, many who have had these encounters report an internal struggle when they are told that they must return to their bodies. There is an undeniable sense of reluctance, as they don't want to leave behind the peace and love they've just encountered. But in the end, they are pulled back to life, often with a renewed sense of purpose and an altered perspective on existence. These remarkable experiences have a profound impact on those who go through them. They struggle to explain what happened in ways that others can understand. Often, their attempts to share their experiences are met with skepticism or even ridicule, leading many to keep their stories to themselves. Nevertheless, these encounters shape the way they live their lives moving forward. They begin to see the world in a new light, one that is filled with greater meaning and a deeper understanding of life and death. Let's return to Roberto Carlos's own experience, which became the cornerstone of this phenomenon. In December of 1943, when Richie was just 20 years old, he was hospitalized with pneumonia. At the time, pneumonia was a deadly disease, and doctors had not yet discovered the life-saving power of penicillin. Richie's condition worsened rapidly, and after his pulse and respiration ceased, he was officially declared dead by the attending physician. His body was left in a hospital room, awaiting transfer to the morgue. 8 minutes later, something extraordinary happened. The orderly who had been tasked with transporting the body returned to the room and noticed that Richie's arm had shifted slightly. Confused, he called for the doctor to check on the body again. The physician, after examining Richie, declared that he was still dead, only for the orderly to insist on administering an adrenaline injection directly into Richie's heart. Against all expectations, the injection revived Richie, restoring his pulse, blood pressure, and respiration. Yet both doctors were convinced that nothing would come of it, and Richie's fate seemed sealed. For 3 more days, Richie remained in a coma. But when he finally awoke, the hospital staff informed him of what had happened, that he had been declared dead and then inexplicably brought back to life. He was baffled by the whole situation and asked, "What happened to me during those minutes when I was dead?" The answer, as he would soon discover, was beyond anyone's comprehension. That night, Richie had a strange and vivid experience. As he lay in his hospital bed, he felt an overwhelming sense of well-being. He decided to get up and find a doctor to tell him that he was feeling much better. As he wandered the hospital halls, he encountered a nurse carrying a tray of medical instruments. When he spoke to her, she didn't acknowledge him, which confused him deeply. It wasn't until later that he realized something was terribly wrong. He had been walking around the hospital in a state of confusion, unable to make sense of what was happening to him. The more he tried to understand, the more alien everything seemed. Returning to his room, Richie found something that would shake him to his core. On his bed, he saw what appeared to be his own body, but covered with a sheet. A hand hung limply over the edge of the bed, and when he looked closer, he recognized the gold ring on the finger, the very same ring that had been a gift from his grandfather. It was the ring that he had worn during his life. The hand that hung lifelessly was his own. In that moment, Roberto Carlos was struck with the surreal realization that he had truly died, and yet here he was, awake and living once again. The experience left Richie profoundly shaken. The world he had once known, the plans he had for his future, the life he had imagined, was now gone. The sense of confusion and loneliness he felt in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. What he had gone through could not be easily explained or understood, and it left him forever changed. It was a feeling of separation from everything he had known, as though he was no longer part of the world he had left behind. The events that unfolded during those 8 minutes and the aftermath that followed would have a lasting impact on Richie's life. He would go on to become a doctor, but the experience would forever shape the way he saw the world, death, and the afterlife. His story became one of the most remarkable accounts of a near-death experience, one that opened up new questions and possibilities for science, spirituality, and the very nature of existence. As soon as Carlos had the idea that he wanted to visit his family, he was outside the hospital. He seemed to be traveling at a speed hundreds of times faster than an airliner as he flew over the land. Warm or chilly, he was neither. He had an aerial perspective on things. Even though his head was telling him it couldn't be done, it really happened. Carlos soared over the sparkling lights of strange cities. Traffic lights were the majority of them. There weren't many automobiles on the road at that hour of the night, but Carlos could see the streets. The cities that he passed above were serene and gloomy. Richmond, Carlos's hometown, was on his flight. There was a massive metropolis on the banks of the river, which was crossed by a high, wide bridge up ahead. George desired to descend the steps so that he might be sent to the next location. Startled, he saw that his flying speed had decreased, and he abruptly halted. Carlos was floating in midair at a height of about 15 meters when he observed a guy below a red-roofed structure with the word "Cafe" written on the wall. "That's who I can ask for directions." Before long, Carlos was strolling beside a pedestrian on the sidewalk. "I move because of my thoughts," he understood. Wearing a thick coat, the guy was in his 40s. "What kind of city is this, please?" Carlos asked him. The guy ignored him and continued walking. George said, "Please tell me, I'm a stranger here," more loudly, as they moved toward the cafe. Reaching for the doorknob, the guy did. The individual could have been stupid and deaf. Carlos's left hand casually brushed the man's shoulder. Through his shoulder, the hand passed. The guy entered the building, opened the door, and vanished. Leaving the elusive guy alone, he wanted to rest against a telegraph pole and reflect on the situation. As if it were not there, the body went through the pillar. Carlos's thoughts were absorbed. Why is this happening? The telegraph pole, the guy from the cafe. I can't seem to connect with the things around me anymore. It's clear that neither the hospital nurse nor this guy saw me. Just for them, I don't exist. If I were to travel to Virginia, why? I doubt that any of my relatives will notice me either. Listen to what Roberto said in his book, Return from Tomorrow, which was published 43 years later. Death is instantaneous. In a second, you are already outside of it, body. Although you are no longer a part of this old body, you may still see it. Even if it's dead, you're still alive, I promise. It may be somewhat isolating to think about your body resting on the bed, to realize that you are neither in heaven nor hell, and to realize that you are unable to communicate with anybody. Realizing this was awful, but if you act quickly and go back to the hospital right away, maybe everything can still be turned around. If he doesn't, his disembodied soul might be lost in this dream's limitless stars forever. All of the young man's aspirations were abruptly fulfilled. The hospital was visited by George Carlos again. It was impossible for him to get the sheet off of his body. Carlos was unsure about where to go or what to do. He had excruciating pain as a result. The little isolation unit was suddenly filled with light, as if 1,000 bulbs had been turned on at once. A person composed of light walked into the room. It was the Son of God, God. He sent forth an unconditional love that Carlos could sense. Then he saw a glimpse of the most significant moments of his life. From the cesarean section delivery to the hundreds of other moments in his life, he remembered it all. He was able to recall every experience in his life, both good and bad. And then Carlos was outside the hospital. His life's landscape vanished along with the light creature. George was flying far above the earth toward a bright, far-off spot. The first time he had traveled alone, he had climbed just a little above the ground. He and the luminous satellite, however, were now considerably higher and traveling at a much greater speed. As it happened, the city where they landed was the bright spot in the distance. Buildings, industries, smoking pipes, and individuals without bodies were all there on the ground. Among the images Carlos recounted were individuals fighting and choking on their own hate. The controversy often escalated into a violent altercation. There was genuine anger on the fighters' expressions, but the transparent bodies were unable to harm the opponent. Those who did not take part in the arguments showed little interest in the matter at all. Hell is how Carlos describes this city, saying that sad people live there. The luminous monster and Carlos lifted off once again and went on their way, creating a new horizon. The light was different in quality. A new level slowly became apparent to Carlos. Massive structures loomed above a lovely sunny park. Suddenly, they seemed to have stepped into another dimension, a different kind of life. Everything was serene. According to Carlos, the buildings, the employees, the light around them, the happiness and the care for other people's welfare are everywhere. Abruptly, the view of the world around them shifted once again, and the man found himself in the laboratories. George was taken aback by the gadgets he saw. He was unable to decipher their mechanism. An image of an atomic reactor was published in a scholarly magazine just 10 years after Carlos's near-death experience. George was taken aback by this picture. This is precisely what Carlos saw on his voyage to other planets in 1943, after all. I emerged from the engineering lab and entered a dark hallway. I could see a variety of future events that mankind will face as I flew through it. I have seen a lot of natural disasters and tragedies. The public didn't learn about the explosions I saw until August 1945, and they were unlike anything I had ever seen. It was then that the bright thing told me in my mind that I should return. Suddenly, George's normal eyesight allowed him to glimpse the familiar ring on his own hand. It is Carlos's belief that he was sent back to Earth to teach people that they could turn their material world into a paradise if they so desired. Carlos was sent to Virginia to further his medical education in January 1944 once he recovered. He and 2 medical students were traveling to Texas in a dilapidated Plymouth at the beginning of October of that year. They were all unfamiliar with the maze of roadways and often got lost since they had never been from Virginia to Texas before. They defeated Memphis and Louisville. After arriving in Mississippi on the 3rd day, they traveled along the east bank of the river to Vicksburg. In front of the maize and sugarcane fields that stretched for kilometers along the river's banks, the city of Vicksburg was situated on a hill. George, the driver's navigator today, was asked, "Do you see any signs?" Carlos had no way to respond. As they made the last kilometer drive to the city, his stomach turned over and his lips dried up. Although he had never been here before, he was able to identify the riverbank and predict where the next bend would be. It was instantly apparent to him that they would be heading to a building with a neon cafe sign and a red roof a block down the street, since the road junctions were familiar. The driver was then instructed by Carlos to go straight ahead and do what he said. When they arrived, they came to the block with the 24-hour cafe. He wanted to get out of the vehicle and rush across the street to the telegraph pole and give it a hug. Here's the sidewalk where I was walking with a man who didn't see me. There's a telegraph pole I stopped by. I wonder how long I've been standing there. He wished the cafe's door would open. I broke off right here, in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Was this the location of my disembodied flight? I paused, pondering my next course of action. The moment I arrived at the cafe, I was overcome with chills. Death is, after all, a huge delusion. The end of the world is not imminent. According to Roberto Carlos, it's only a door that leads to the next room. To put it simply, this tale really got to me. Probably one of the most striking tales demonstrating that death marks the start of a new life. What do you think? Friend, please share your thoughts in the comments. I appreciate you staying through the whole video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it if you like it. That is crucial. I appreciate it. Have a good day.